The street was nearly silent, except for a thin echo of tin moving across stone. A bowl, small and dented, rolled once, caught the moonlight, and stopped. A man bent to pick it up. He didn't look at it, only brushed the dust from its rim and kept walking. Behind him came his wife, a torn sari brushing her ankles, and their son, barefoot, moving by rhythm more than will. The moon had drained the sky of colour. Even the shadows looked tired. Calcutta, that night, was holding its breath. Wind drifted through broken shutters. Smoke from kitchen fires that no longer cooked anything rose into the alleys and clung to the walls like memory. In the distance, a child cried once, thin, sudden, quickly swallowed by the quiet. If you had stood there in 1943, you might have mistaken the city for one that had stopped existing. But the truth was worse. It hadn't died. It was still alive, just too hungry to move. They didn't speak. Words cost energy now. The father carried the tin bowl like an inheritance. It rattled softly each time his fingers trembled. The boy kept close, tracing cracks in the pavement that once carried trams and traders and the marching boots of empire. Those same stones had once been loud with life. Now they gleamed with a polish only silence can give. The city that had once fed half of eastern India could no longer feed itself. Ships lined the Hooghly River, their holds filled not with food, but with war cargo. Steel, ammunition, sacks of rice stamped for His Majesty's forces. Britain was at war. And Bengal, as Winston Churchill called it in his telegrams, was a food-producing province of the empire, expected to meet obligations first. Harvests had failed after the cyclone. Burmese rice, once Bengal's safety valve, had vanished when Japan seized Rangoon. Prices tripled, then doubled again. The government fixed grain prices so low that farmers stopped selling altogether. The railways, the veins of the land, were commandeered to move troops east, not grain inland. The result was a city of ghosts pretending to walk. If you turn down Harrison Road, you might still hear the leftover sounds of what the city used to be. A tram bell far away, a radio left playing in a colonial club. But those were echoes, not life. The closer you came to the markets, the less you heard. Burra Bazaar, once the loudest place in Asia, spoke now only in whispers. Men sat by the skeletons of their stalls, their scales resting empty on the ground. Posters that said, "Ration discipline is patriotism," peeled off the walls. Beneath them, people leaned against the bricks and measured hunger by the hour. Somewhere near College Street, an old civil servant wrote in his diary, "The air itself feels thin, as though the city were being starved of sound." He was right. Even the crows had quieted. The family walked through that hush like figures in a half-developed photograph. At Sealdah Station, rows of sleepers curled on the pavement, too weak to beg, too proud to die where they lay. The father slowed, but didn't stop. Stopping meant choice, and choice had become a luxury. A British convoy passed, 3 trucks filled with rice sacks marked for Burma front. Soldiers smoked, laughing under their helmets. The boy watched the smoke curl upward, confused that such laughter still existed. When the wind shifted, it carried the smell of fried meat from Chowringi's hotels. The father closed his eyes. A guest diary from the Great Eastern Hotel recorded that week's menu: roast chicken, custard, and coffee from Kenya. Down the street, people boiled water tinted white by a single grain of rice dropped for luck. 2 worlds, 1 city. Rumour moved faster than any tram. Relief rice has come to Howrah. The army will distribute grain at dawn. The Americans have landed supplies. None of it true. By midnight, the family reached a courtyard where empty rice tins were lined along the wall, relics of abundance. The mother picked one up and shook it. A single kernel rattled inside. She smiled faintly, as though proof of grain was proof of grace. They slept there, heads against the stone, while the city's generators hummed for the privileged few. At dawn, the air turned silver. Calcutta looked almost clean in that light, a cruel trick of morning. The boy woke first, licking dew from the rim of the bowl. All around, people stirred from sidewalks and stairwells. A man tied his shoes to trade them. Another brushed dust from a wedding photograph, before tearing it into small rectangles to sell as kindling. Money had stopped meaning anything. Hunger had replaced it as currency. A pound of rice now cost more than a labourer's weekly pay. Traders locked their storerooms. Hoarders doubled their fortunes. The government blamed speculation. Churchill blamed the Bengali character. In London, when asked to release Australian wheat for India, Churchill reportedly said, "If food is scarce, why hasn't Gandhi died yet?" Calcutta heard that insult in silence. The family moved again. Along the way they saw signs of a new economy. A woman offering her silk shawl for 2 fistfuls of barley. A clerk selling the pen he once used to record other men's debts. A girl cutting her hair to sell to wig merchants. Scarcity makes philosophers of everyone. Near a shuttered bakery, a cook dumped a pot of rinse water into the gutter. Children ran to it, scooping with their palms, licking them clean. The cook looked away, humming a tune from the cinema, because pity was dangerous when you still had food. The mother whispered a memory of a festival where rice puddings simmered all night. The father didn't answer. Words like "remember" had become indulgent. They passed a wall chalked with slogans, victory through sacrifice. Underneath, someone had written in smaller letters, "Whose?" By nightfall, the streets filled with movement again, not of commerce but of searching. People carried tins and bowls, listening for the rumour of food the way sailors listen for wind. The family followed the sound of a bell. It led to the Beaubazar market, once a kingdom of colour. Now, it was a cathedral of shadows. The stalls leaned inward, bamboo bones glistening with rain. Somewhere a candle flickered in a bottle, throwing light on a heap of wilted greens. The seller, half asleep, muttered prices no one could pay. Beside her, a man roasted something under a tin sheet. Roots, maybe bark. It smelled like hope, pretending to be food. The father remembered when he used to buy fruit here after work. Guavas, cheap and sweet. The same stall now sold leaves. The boy crouched beside a gutter where a kitten licked at a puddle of spilled rice water. For a second he smiled. Then it mewed weakly and collapsed. The mother drew him close. "Don't watch," she whispered. But he had already learned that hunger doesn't look away. The sound began with one bowl. Someone in the shadows tapped tin against stone, slow, deliberate. Another joined, then another. Within minutes the market echoed with the rhythm of hundreds. No slogans, no chants, just metal on stone. The father lowered their bowl and added its hollow note to the chorus. The boy's eyes widened as the sound swelled. Not angry, not mournful, just present. It was the sound of recognition. We are still here. Later, officials would call it a disturbance. But those who survived called it the night of empty bowls. The noise spread through the city, reaching even the British cantonments, where officers mistook it for distant thunder. But thunder feeds the earth. This sound only marked those it passed over. When dawn came, the tapping stopped. The streets were quiet again. But something had changed. Hunger had learned to speak. The day after the night of empty bowls, Calcutta's newspapers said nothing. Page 1 spoke of Allied advances in Italy. Page 2 of a British charity ball held at the Grand Hotel. Tea served at 4, waltz till 6. There was no mention of the noise that had filled the streets the night before. The Empire's newsprint, like its memory, knew how to skip a line. But the rumour of sound had already spread faster than the ink could cover. By morning, civil servants whispered about incidents of unrest. The colonial secretary ordered patrols to watch the markets. One report from the Bengal Secretariat noted that the famine has not yet produced a political consciousness, as if hunger needed politics to prove its truth. Far away, in London, a message reached Downing Street. It came from the Viceroy's office, a request for grain shipments to relieve the shortages in Bengal. The response was blunt. Shipping is not available. Priority to military operations. Churchill's War Cabinet met that week to discuss supplies for Europe. India's request came up between agenda items labelled wheat for Greece and barley for Turkey. The minutes record one line. Indian situation. Distress exaggerated. Civil mismanagement suspected. When the Indian secretary suggested that hundreds of thousands were already dying, Churchill's reply was noted by his private secretary, Sir Alexander Cadogan. Then why hasn't Gandhi died yet? That sarcasm crossed an ocean like a bullet no one could trace. Inside India House in London, the statistician Amory wrote privately to the Prime Minister, "I hate Indians. They are a beastly people with a beastly religion," Churchill had said at lunch. Amory, disgusted, later remarked, "I didn't see much difference between Churchill's outlook and Hitler's." But by the time that letter reached Bengal, the damage had 1,000,000 faces. The famine was not drought. It was design. The family walked that day through lanes that smelled of ash and boiled weeds. Posters urging "grow more food" flapped in the wind. Children traced the English letters without knowing what they said. Grow more food. But the government had already seized the boats that carried grain from the villages, fearing they might fall into Japanese hands. It was called the boat denial policy. In practice, it stranded farmers. It left fishermen idle and cut off the countryside from its own riverbanks. A single policy meant to block invasion now blocked survival. The father didn't know these words, but he knew their echo. No rice, no boats, no road left to walk except the one into the city. That was how millions began arriving in Calcutta, carrying their hunger like luggage, their hopes like debt. By August, the city's population had doubled. Refugees slept under tramcars, on railway platforms, on the steps of government buildings. Some called them invasions of beggars. Others, more honest, called them what they were: citizens abandoned by an empire that had already measured their worth in tons of export. The boy saw them everywhere now. Bodies folded along walls like punctuation marks, each one ending a sentence nobody finished. He stopped counting when numbers lost meaning. The mother whispered prayers without sound. She no longer asked for food, only that her child wouldn't learn to beg the way other children did, with open eyes and closed mouths. By late afternoon, the sun burned pale over Chowringhee. A convoy of soldiers rolled past the Victoria Memorial, its marble glowing like bone. The trucks carried sacks of rice from Orissa, not for distribution, but for storage. Behind the fences, guards smoked lazily. The father stood watching. He didn't shout. He only stared at the sacks with a reverence once reserved for gods. Inside one of the trucks, a young British driver looked back at him through the canvas flap. He had arrived 2 months earlier, fresh from Birmingham. He would later write to his mother, "The locals are dying in thousands. It's said to be famine, but we've orders not to interfere. It feels like watching rain drown a field you're not allowed to till." The letter never reached home. It was censored for morale. The family turned toward the docks, following the scent of salt and decay. Ships still lined the Hooghly, some unloading weapons, others exporting jute and tea. Men in uniform barked orders. Labourers with ribs like bamboo carried crates marked "Product of Bengal" to London. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. At the water's edge, a group of women knelt, scooping brown river water into bowls. They drank and shivered and didn't stop. The mother hesitated, then joined them. The boy followed, tasting the city's reflection on his tongue: metal, ash, and faint sweetness from rot upstream. When they looked up, gulls circled the horizon. The father said softly, "Even the birds look full." Night fell again, sudden and heavy. The city's lamps flickered with rationed current. Somewhere in the north, an air raid siren sounded, a false alarm, but people still ducked instinctively. War had trained them to fear the sky, but not to question it. In the alleys, hunger had begun changing shape. It was no longer shock, it was structure. People spoke less, moved slower, learned to rest standing up. The body, like the city, had entered negotiation with absence. The boy no longer cried. The father no longer prayed. They existed in the quiet middle, not yet gone, not yet surviving. And through it all, the empire kept its ledgers. Ships left port, full and on schedule. Reports arrived in London marked "Situation contained." But nothing about Calcutta was contained. The famine leaked into everything: air, rumour, conscience. One night, as the boy slept beside the empty bowl, the father whispered, "They said the world is fighting for freedom." But whose? The wind didn't answer. The morning begins with a sound that doesn't belong. The clang of a bell, the kind used by vegetable sellers. For a moment, everyone in the lane freezes. The bell means food, or rumour of it. Then they see him, a man pushing a wooden cart, calling softly, "Rice water, rice water." It isn't food. It's the runoff from someone else's meal. The thin, cloudy liquid saved from boiling rice, sold by the ladle. He pours it into tin bowls like medicine. People drink slowly, letting the warmth fool their stomachs into feeling alive. When he runs out, he bows his head once, almost apologetically, and moves on. That's how business is done now. Apology first, transaction second. By August, famine has invented new professions. Some trade corpses to cremation grounds for a handful of coppers. Some sell flowers stolen from temple offerings. Some, too weak for labour, rent out their shadows, standing near British officers' cars so drivers can claim ample staff to justify wages. The police call them the living statistics. On Chowringhee Road, under a hotel awning, a girl no older than 12 leans against the wall. She holds a string of fake pearls, once sold to tourists. Now the tourists are gone, but soldiers still come. The pearls are her price of entry. One for a coin, all for a night. She doesn't look up when footsteps pass. She's learned that hunger has 2 languages. One for begging, one for silence. The family walks through this world like witnesses. They've stopped asking questions. Answers only slow you down. They pass a row of shops labelled "Authorised Buyers Only." Behind glass sit tins of biscuits and condensed milk, all stamped "For Army Use." A guard with polished boots leans on his rifle, yawning. The father stares through the window, and for a second his reflection overlaps the canned food. He looks like a ghost, haunting his own appetite. Beside him, a sign reads, "Rationing means patriotism." Someone has scratched beneath it, in Bengali, "Starving is treason too." By midday, heat folds over the city like cloth. The drains steam. The air smells of salt, sewage and molasses. Flies move slower now, heavy with satisfaction. The family stops near a warehouse district where men with slicked hair and gold watches sit on crates. They are the new kings, the black market brokers. Their ledgers replace conscience. A sack of rice costs what a man might earn in 2 months. They buy it anyway, trading jewelry, furniture, sometimes people. A woman offers her brass wedding bangles. The broker weighs them in his hand, nods, and gestures to a half-filled tin of rice. She clutches it like a newborn. The father watches, torn between awe and disgust. He steps forward and asks the price of a smaller measure. The broker glances at his empty hands and shakes his head. No metal, no food. The tone isn't cruel, just factual, as if morality has been rationed too. The mother pulls the boy away. He looks back, confused. "Why didn't he help us?" She answers softly, "Because he still can." That's the secret of famine. Those who can help are too frightened of becoming the helped. By evening, the warehouses glow orange from kerosene lamps. Each lamp marks a dealer's domain. Men guard sacks with rifles. Women guard their places in line. Every few minutes, a gunshot echoes from somewhere distant. Warning, accident, or argument, nobody knows. Each shot carries the same message. Hunger has lost its manners. Near the docks, soldiers distribute tins of army biscuits to labourers unloading supplies. The biscuits are old, stamped, for training use only, but they smell divine. The crowd gathers fast. The officer shouts, "Line! 1 per person!" Within minutes, the line collapses into a wave. The officer fires once into the air, then again. Silence follows. When the smoke clears, a single biscuit lies crushed in the mud. The father crouches to pick it up. It's wet, half dissolved. He presses it flat, tears it in 3, and shares it without speaking. For a few seconds, they all taste sweetness. The boy smiles. The mother closes her eyes. When the taste fades, they feel almost human again. Later that night, rain returns. It comes without warning, sudden, cleansing, cruel. The city floods within minutes. Drains overflow, washing away the day's dead from corners no one cleaned. Bodies drift past like forgotten offerings. The family shelters beneath a wooden awning. Water runs through the cracks, dripping onto their faces. The boy catches drops in the tin bowl, drinking between thunderclaps. Each swallow feels stolen. The father watches him, half ashamed at feeling grateful for rain. Across the street, a man sits on a barrel under a lantern. He's writing in a notebook. His clothes mark him as foreign, British perhaps, or American. The father recognizes him from rumour, one of the photographers who have begun to haunt the famine's edges, documenting what officials refuse to name. The man raises his camera. The flash cuts the night like lightning. For a moment, the boy's face appears in its glare, thin, luminous, beautiful in its fragility. The man lowers the camera, hesitates, then hands the father a coin. Not large, but enough. The father takes it silently, unsure whether gratitude should feel this hollow. He would learn later that the photo, once published, would travel the world, printed under the caption, "Victims of Bengal Hunger." It would make headlines, win sympathy, and change nothing. When dawn comes, the rain has turned the streets into mirrors. The family walks through their reflections, each step rippling their own likeness. The father still holds the photographer's coin. He rubs it between his fingers, feeling its weight. He could sell it for rice, or keep it as proof that someone saw them. He decides to keep it. Elsewhere in the city, another man counts coins of his own. Piles of them, neat and gleaming, stacked atop a ledger in a British club. He's a merchant from Madras, newly wealthy from hoarding grain. When asked if the famine has affected business, he smiles. "It depends," he says. "Some people are starving. Others are eating twice." That line will never make it to the papers. By nightfall, the family reaches the northern districts, the poorer quarters beyond the tram lines. Here, the city thins into open fields where relief camps sprawl in tents of burlap. A sign reads, "Government relief, registration required." They join the line, waiting for hours. When their turn comes, an officer stamps a form and hands them half a ladle of rice gruel. The mother holds it carefully, hands shaking. The boy drinks first. Steam rises like incense. For the first time in weeks, they taste rice that wasn't stolen, traded, or found. The father murmurs, "Maybe things are turning." But behind them, another officer whispers to his clerk, "Supplies finished. Close the gate." And the night folds in again, quiet as a prayer said too late. The relief camp smelled of smoke, wet cloth, and boiled starch. It wasn't quite life, but it wasn't death either. It was the space in between, where survival waited its turn. The family sat near the edge of the tent, among hundreds. The boy had a fever. His skin burned even as his hands felt cold. The mother fanned him with a folded leaflet that said, "Emergency Measures, Bengal Relief, 1943. It had been printed weeks ago when the government first admitted, in cautious language, that food distress existed. Food distress, not famine. Words like rations were carefully measured. Outside the camp, the empire's machinery began to spin, not to feed the starving, but to protect its story. British radio broadcasts described temporary shortages. A pamphlet distributed to soldiers said, "Do not be alarmed by local rumours. Bengal continues to function normally, under government control." In London, The Times published a short column. "Reports of famine in India have been greatly exaggerated. Bengal has suffered a poor harvest, but relief measures are underway." No reporter from The Times had been to Bengal that year. Yet not all voices were silent. From Delhi, a young journalist named Ian Stevens, editor of The Statesman, defied orders. He sent photographers into the streets, instructed them to capture what he called truth without sentiment. When the images reached his desk, children skeletal and staring, mothers holding infants already gone, he hesitated. Then he printed them. August 22nd, 1943. The day Calcutta saw itself in black and white. The British Information Office called it a regrettable lapse in judgment. Stevens called it conscience. In one of his editorials, he wrote, "If the people of Britain wish to speak of freedom, let them look upon Bengal first." The article reached Churchill's office by cable. The Prime Minister's margin note, "These Indians breed like rabbits." Inside the camp, no one knew about editorials. Newsprint doesn't feed. But a missionary did arrive that week. A tall man in a white cassock, eyes sunken from travel. He moved from tent to tent, offering blessings, not food. In his journal he would later write, "They received the sacrament with empty hands. I can do little but bear witness." The boy's mother watched him trace a cross in the air. When he passed, she whispered to her husband, "He prays as if God were English." The father didn't answer. He was watching something else. A lorry arriving at the camp gate. Soldiers unloading boxes stamped with a red cross. For a moment, hope lifted like smoke. But the boxes were marked medical supplies, not food. They were distributed to hospitals, not tents. Hope is rationed too. That night, the camp flickered with candlelight. A distant voice crackled from a radio, one of the guards listening to the BBC. The broadcast said that Allied troops had retaken parts of Burma, that victory was near. Then a cheerful jingle played, "Buy victory bonds. Every rupee helps defeat tyranny." The father laughed softly. The mother turned to him, startled. "Why laugh?" He said, "Because they think tyranny lives only in Berlin." In a bungalow across town, another man was listening to the same radio, a colonial officer named Richard Thompson. He was tired, disillusioned, and still clinging to the idea that empire meant order. In his diary that week he wrote, "We are losing India, not because of politics, but because we are ashamed to look at it." He had once believed his post was civil service. Now he saw it for what it was, civil silence. When he visited the famine camp, he kept his hat on, because the smell was unbearable. He wrote afterward, "They do not speak, they just look. It is like walking through an accusation." He recommended more rice shipments from Punjab. His memo was ignored. The file was labelled, "No urgency." Meanwhile, Gandhi, under house arrest in Pune, heard of the famine through letters smuggled in. He wrote back to his followers, "This is not God's punishment. It is man's failure to see God in man." The British censors let that one through. It seemed harmless enough. But to those dying in Bengal, it wasn't philosophy. It was diagnosis. In Calcutta itself, the famine became an open secret everyone learned to step around. The rich stayed indoors. The poor slept on the steps outside their gates. Carriages swerved around bodies. Drivers carried brooms to clear them from the path before dawn. At Government House, ballroom lights still glowed. There were dances, fundraisers, polite speeches about resilience. Champagne corks echoed faintly over the city's thin cries. A British matron, in a letter to her sister in Surrey, wrote, "We are advised not to look directly at the beggars. It seems to unsettle the natives when we show emotion." But emotion was still there, not gone, only buried under the weight of guilt. In Kaligat Temple, priests whispered that the goddess herself had turned her face away. Devotees offered what little they had, flowers wilted before dawn, coins dark from handling. Some brought the names of their dead, written on scraps of paper, and set them aflame. The smoke rose straight, as if even the air refused to bend. The family stood among them, the boy resting in his mother's lap. The father lit a candle, not for prayer, but to keep the flies away. The flame quivered, mirrored in the boy's eyes. He asked, "Will the gods eat tonight?" His mother didn't answer. She only hummed, an old lullaby about rivers and rain and rice fields that used to shine like glass under the monsoon. The sound drifted upward, mingling with the smoke, rising into a sky that had grown used to ignoring prayers. Far to the north, Churchill dined that same night with military advisers. Roast lamb, potatoes, port. They discussed shipping routes, not death tolls. When one aide mentioned reports of serious famine conditions, Churchill replied between bites, "Ah, but Indians will always starve when they breed so fast." Another aide asked if shipments could be diverted. Churchill waved his fork. "If we send them food, the Japanese will eat it." History would remember that line, not because it was cruel, but because it was honest. Empires do not die from lies. They die from honesty, spoken too late. Back in Calcutta, the rain returned with the regularity of habit. The boy coughed in his sleep, a dry, hollow sound that made the mother flinch each time. The father watched, helpless. Outside, thunder rolled over the city, the kind that doesn't cleanse, only reminds. Lightning flickered over the Hooghly, illuminating the anchored ships, still heavy with cargo bound for Europe. The water gleamed like molten lead. and for a heartbeat, the whole city looked like a painting of its own destruction.
By late September, the city had become a jungle of smoke. The monsoon had passed, leaving behind a smell that no rain could wash away. A mixture of rotting grain, river mud, and something heavier that had no name. The family had moved from the relief camp into a stretch of railway arches along the eastern line. Dozens of families slept there, beneath iron girders still warm from the day's heat, beside tracks that no longer carried passengers. Trains came rarely now, and when they did, people ran toward the noise, as though sound itself might feed them. The boy liked the arches. He said they sounded like drums when he shouted. Even in famine, children find echoes worth chasing. He had begun to wander with other boys, a small barefoot army of survivors. They called themselves the Steam Children. They scavenged the train yards by day and slept by the boiler vents at night, where the air was warm enough to pretend to dream. The father worried, but there was little to forbid. You can't ground a child when the ground itself is hunger. The boy came back each evening with treasures. A rusted bolt, a half-burned matchbook, once even a piece of coal shaped like a heart. He gave it to his mother. She smiled, and for a moment the gesture made her look young again. Around the arches, an odd economy flourished. Children sold scraps to mechanics, carried buckets of ash, or offered to shine soldiers' boots for crumbs. They called every foreigner Sahib, even when begging. Names were heavy things to carry when you were already light from hunger. A British officer once asked a boy his name. The boy grinned. "Rice," he said. The officer laughed, not understanding it was a joke without joy. One afternoon, the boy found a stray dog near the tracks, ribs showing, tail cautious. He fed it the last grain from their bowl. It followed him home. He named it Steam. For days the two were inseparable, scavenging together, sleeping together. The dog never barked. It knew better than to draw attention. But one morning the boy woke to find it gone. A group of men had taken it. Famine does not leave animals out of its accounting. He ran down the lane, calling, but there was only smoke rising from a tin drum nearby. When he came back, his face was dry but his hands shook. He whispered, "I shouldn't have named him." The mother said nothing. The father turned away, ashamed of being relieved it wasn't one of them. By October, cholera followed hunger like a second shadow. The wells turned sour, the drains overflowed. Medical volunteers sprayed disinfectant through the streets, their masks turning them into faceless spectres. The boy watched them from a distance. He thought they looked like ghosts cleaning up other ghosts. That week, the city crematorium stopped counting. So many dead arrived each day that the fires never went out. They called it the unending season. And yet, amid the ruin, life continued its strange theatre. Children played cricket with bamboo sticks. Girls drew hopscotch lines with chalk stolen from warehouses. They laughed, loudly, defiantly, as though to prove that sound still belonged to the living. One afternoon, a group of missionaries came through the arches with a camera crew. They filmed the children, smiling and waving. Later, those images would be used in fundraising reels abroad, set to hopeful music, narrated in English. The caption would read, "The resilient spirit of Bengal." None of the money ever reached the arches. The boy had started coughing again, dry, then wet. The mother tried to boil river water, but fuel was scarce. The father scavenged for coal near the yards and found a sack of half-burned lumps left by a worker. He carried it home like a treasure. That night they lit a small fire. The smoke curled through the arches, blue and heavy, smelling faintly of oil. The boy lay near it, eyes reflecting the flame. He whispered, "When I grow up,
I want to drive the trains. His father smiled in the half-dark. Then you'll take us somewhere there's no hunger. The boy nodded, already half asleep. The train whistle sounded in the distance, a long, mournful note. To the boy, it sounded like a promise. To the father, it sounded like goodbye. In another part of Calcutta that same night, a photographer named Sunil Jana was developing film. He had spent the day in the famine districts, documenting what officials refused to see. One of the negatives showed the same railway arches, and among the figures, a boy crouched beside a small fire. His face glowed faintly, eyes alive. Jana paused, moved by the look. He wrote beneath the print, "Still burning." That photograph would later hang in galleries across the world, proof that even famine could look beautiful from a distance. But for the boy, beauty was just the light you could still see before the fire went out. Weeks passed. The family remained under the arches, each day narrowing around the same rhythm: wake, search, wait, sleep. Hunger no longer hurt. It simply existed. The father's shoulders shrank inward, the mother's eyes grew dim, and the boy's voice softened to a whisper. Then one morning a train came through unexpectedly, a military transport. It blew its whistle, scattering pigeons, and for a moment every child on the platform ran towards it, laughing. They chased it until it vanished into the smoke. The sound lingered long after. For the rest of the day the boy kept repeating the whistle with his lips, a thin imitation, half song, half memory. The father watched him and thought, even in famine there is music. It only changes instruments. By October's end, the famine had become the city's unwanted twin. It lived beside the living, not hidden, but ignored, as if denial could starve it too. If you walked from the northern districts toward Park Street, you could feel the transition, like a fever breaking. The air changed first. Less smoke, more perfume. Streetlights glowed brighter, trams ran smoother, and the faces looked fed, polished, rehearsed. It was said that Calcutta had two stomachs, one always full, one always empty. Both belonged to the same body. In the southern quarters, the British clubs stayed open. Colonial officers played billiards under chandeliers, while string quartets performed softly between conversations about war and weather. Waiters in starched white jackets served gin and cucumber sandwiches. The pianist at the Bengal club played "I'll Be Seeing You." The melody drifted out through open windows into a city that had stopped singing. At midnight, a soldier stepped outside for a cigarette. He saw, under the lamppost, a body curled against the curb, not sleeping, not stirring. He hesitated, then tossed the last bit of his cigarette beside it before walking back in. Inside, someone was laughing loudly. The piano continued. The same night, half a mile away, the father was standing by the Hooghly, staring at the ships. Each one bore the flag of the Empire, Union Jacks fluttering against a wind that smelled of death. They were loading jute, tea, coal, everything but food. One of the dock workers whispered, "Even God has left the port." The boy sat nearby, tracing circles in the dirt with a stick. He didn't ask questions anymore. The mother hummed softly, the same lullaby she always used when the silence grew too sharp. Somewhere upriver, a boat carrying relief rice capsized. The rumour reached the city by morning, but few believed it mattered. People had stopped distinguishing between accidents and policy. The press began calling it the Bengal tragedy. In Dalhousie Square, British businessmen gathered for tea. They spoke of profits, of rubber shortages, of wartime efficiency. One of them remarked that these native famines are cyclical. Another nodded. Yes, like monsoon season. History would later record both statements as evidence of how empire rationalized its reflection. Outside the window, a child pressed her face to the glass, fogging it with her breath. The waiter shooed her away. The businessman continued talking, undisturbed. At the same time, in Borough Bazaar, black market rice sold at 15 times its pre-war price. The brokers called it gold grain. They operated under the protection of men in uniform, officials who preferred profit to paperwork. One broker joked, "Rice is the new opium. Everyone addicted, no one innocent." He wasn't wrong. The father once traded his last piece of silver, a wedding gift, for a tin of coarse rice. It was full of husks and pebbles, but they ate every grain. That night, the mother said, "I never knew metal could taste like food." The father replied, "Everything does, once you've forgotten flavour." Farther south, in the British residential quarters, another dinner was being served. Tables lined with white linen, menus handwritten in cursive. Courses: tomato soup, roast lamb, pudding. A gramophone played quietly in the background. A guest, a colonel recently arrived from Burma, remarked on the peculiar odour drifting through the windows. The hostess replied, "It's the river, always dreadful this time of year." She didn't realise it was the smell of burning bodies from the cremation grounds upstream. She laughed lightly and poured more wine. There were whispers among the Indian clerks who still worked in the government offices. They said some officers were diverting rice meant for relief into military storage, falsifying receipts. A few tried to protest. They were transferred to smaller posts. The famine made corruption efficient. When survival is uncertain, morality becomes a luxury item. One of those clerks later wrote, "We were ordered to maintain calm." Calm became another word for complicity. In the north, where the family lived, calm looked like surrender. The days blurred together. Grey light, long lines, the thin music of hunger. The boy stopped playing. He sat by the railway arch and listened to distant traffic, eyes half closed, as though the city's faint hum were a lullaby. One afternoon, a British Red Cross nurse passed by. She handed him a biscuit, then moved on. He stared at it for a long time, before breaking it into 3 pieces and calling for his parents. The mother cried when she saw it. Not because it was food, but because it was kindness. By December, the monsoon had long passed. The streets were dry, but the air still carried a heaviness that no season could lift. In the relief camps, cholera gave way to malaria. Doctors noted that mortality is stabilizing, which only meant fewer were left to die. The father grew weaker each week. He walked slower, spoke less. Sometimes he sat by the river, staring at the current like a man studying a language he'd once known. The mother still whispered prayers, but they sounded like apologies now. The boy asked, "When will the famine end?" She said, "When someone remembers us." But remembrance, like rain, was late that year. At Victoria Memorial, the lawns remained immaculate. Soldiers lounged under palm trees, reading newspapers that never mentioned the word famine. The statue of Queen Victoria looked down, her marble eyes fixed on eternity. A pigeon perched on her crown. No one noticed. History loves symmetry. A starving empire feeding its statues before its subjects. That night, under the same sky, the family sat by their small fire. The father coughed until he tasted blood. The mother held his hand. The boy stared into the flame, remembering the train's whistle. He whispered, "When the trains run again, can we go home?" The mother smiled faintly. "We are home, my love." The world just forgot the address. By the first weeks of 1944, Calcutta had learned to walk in silence. The famine had stopped being an event. It had become the weather, a season without end. Every dawn, the same pilgrimage began. Thin figures moving toward the river, bowls and bundles in hand. The Hooghly had become the city's last faith. People came not to worship, but to disappear. The family joined that flow one grey morning. The father's cough had worsened. The mother's eyes were rimmed red from sleeplessness. The boy held the empty tin bowl like a compass. They followed the path down through the ghats, steps slick with ash, lined with marigolds gone brown. The smell of smoke and salt stung the air. The cremation fires never stopped now. They flickered like broken stars along the bank. A priest chanted near the water, voice cracked, his prayers hoarse from overuse. He wasn't guiding souls anymore. He was counting them. Boats drifted close to the shore, heavy with bodies wrapped in burlap. Each bundle slid into the current, vanishing without splash. The river swallowed without protest. The boy watched wide-eyed. He asked, "Where do they go?" The father answered, "Downstream, to the sea." The mother added quietly, "Where no one needs to eat." On the opposite bank, soldiers loaded crates onto barges, munitions, spare engines, barrels of fuel. The same cranes that once hoisted sacks of grain now lifted steel. War always eats first. A clerk at the docks, pencil behind his ear, recorded every shipment. In his ledger he noted, "Exports proceeding normally." The line below, blank, should have read, "Population not." The family found a place under a banyan tree where the shade reached the water. There they rested. The father washed his hands, trembling. The mother filled the bowl with river water and set it before him like an offering. He drank slowly, then smiled. A small, tired smile. "It tastes like home," he said. The boy crouched beside him, staring at the reflection of the clouds. For a moment, the three of them looked like one shape in the rippling mirror. A single body made of light and shadow. Around them, the ghats filled with others. Women bathed their infants, washing ribs instead of limbs. Men recited verses from the Gita through chapped lips. One sang a song about the harvest moon. No one remembered the melody's end. A British medical unit passed by, distributing lime water and tablets. Their jeep splashed through puddles of ash and flower petals. The officer kept his gaze forward, repeating orders. "Do not linger. Photograph only for records." His driver looked once, then looked away. You can't drive and weep at the same time. The boy wandered toward the edge. The river lapped softly, gentle as breath. He dipped his fingers in and drew a circle on the surface. "See," he said, "it moves even when I stop." The father nodded. That's how life works. He tried to stand but couldn't. The mother knelt beside him. "Rest," she whispered. "The tide will come." He smiled again, eyes half closed. "Then let it carry me." That night, the fires burned higher. Across the river, the city glowed orange from the cremation grounds. The wind carried ash over the water, a grey snowfall settling on roofs, on temples, on those still breathing. Children caught flakes in their hands, mistaking them for dust from stars. A group of monks walked through the lanes, chanting for the souls of the unnamed. Their voices rose and fell with the wind, a slow, steady hum that sounded like the river thinking aloud. In the dark, the boy woke to thunder, but it wasn't thunder. It was artillery from the Burma front, carried across hundreds of miles. The war was moving east, closer. The Empire still called it victory. He looked at his mother. She was holding the bowl again, now filled with river water and petals. He thought she looked like a priestess guarding a small world of her own. He whispered, "Will he wake up?" She answered without looking at him, "He already has." The boy didn't understand, but when dawn came, the father was still. Eyes open toward the water, expression calm. The mother closed them gently. The boy touched the bowl and felt the river's pulse through it. They waited until the fires dimmed. Then, with the help of two strangers, they carried the father's body to the edge. The mother lit a small wick soaked in oil. The flame trembled, then caught. The boy whispered something no one heard. It might have been a prayer. It might have been a memory. The river took him quietly. No splash, no sound. Just a widening ripple that faded into the current. By afternoon, the mother and son sat on the steps. The air shimmered with heat. Boats moved lazily across the horizon. Somewhere upriver, a temple bell rang 3 times, then stopped. The mother said, "The river keeps everything." The boy asked, "Even him?" She smiled faintly. "Especially him." The wind lifted the ashes from her hands and carried them west, toward the sea. In the official records, that day would be noted as one among thousands. Casualties due to famine-related causes. No name, no address, just arithmetic. But the river remembered differently. It remembered faces, voices, bowls, songs, and the way sunlight bent when it touched the dying. For the Hooghly, the famine was not statistics. It was a tide that would never fully go out. The first monsoon after the famine arrived early, as if ashamed of its lateness the year before. Clouds gathered like guilty witnesses above the rooftops, and when the rain finally broke, it fell without pause for 3 days. Calcutta inhaled. The downpour washed the ash from walls, cooled the cobblestones, and filled the gutters with a sound that was almost laughter. But the rain also revealed what it could not cleanse. Bones that had been hidden beneath tarpaulins, rice husks clinging to drains, the faint outline of bodies long carried away. The city smelled of renewal and remembrance at once, petrichor mixed with rot. The boy and his mother stayed near the ghats. They had nowhere else to go, and the river, for all its ghosts, still offered water. Sometimes she sold flowers to temple visitors. Sometimes she simply watched the rain fall through the banyan leaves and called it work. The boy collected things that floated by. A cork, a shortcut, a shard of glass, once even a playing card. He said the river was returning what it owed. Each evening, they lit a tiny wick and set it adrift. The light wobbled on the current before vanishing, swallowed by mist. She told him it was his father saying good night. The famine had not ended. It had only moved inland. The villages beyond Howrah still starved, but Calcutta was healing in layers. New grain shipments, new ration cards, new excuses. Relief committees printed pamphlets declaring, "Bengal recovers." Posters showed smiling workers harvesting rice beneath wide skies. Those who had survived learned to nod and agree. Disbelief was expensive. In College Street, booksellers reopened their stalls. The smell of wet paper filled the air. Students returned to the university, thinner but determined. They debated independence, socialism, literature, anything but hunger. One boy stood on a crate shouting, "When the British leave, famine will leave too." A passerby muttered, "Hunger has no passport." It was both prophecy and warning. The mother found work sweeping floors in a government depot. Each morning she walked past crates stamped RICE-AUSTRIA. She was told not to open them. She didn't need to. The sound of grain shifting inside was enough. At noon she ate a handful of rice boiled with salt. Sometimes she saved half for the boy. Sometimes he pretended he wasn't hungry. She carried his father's tin bowl with her every day. It had rusted at the rim, but she said it kept her balanced, like a charm that still remembered prayer. The boy grew quiet. He no longer played with the river children. Instead, he followed the trains again, counting the carriages, learning their numbers. One evening, a driver noticed him and called out, "You like these beasts?" The boy nodded. The man tossed him a piece of chalk. "Then mark them." From then on, white chalk lines began appearing on the rail cars. Tiny tallies no one else noticed. They were the boy's secret scripture, proof that movement still existed in a city that had once stopped breathing. In March 1944, Churchill finally allowed shipments of grain to reach Bengal. By then, millions were gone. The official reports called it a reduction of demand. Trains arrived loaded with sacks that bore the emblem of the empire. Crowds gathered to watch them unload, their faces unreadable. Some cheered, others turned away. The boy stood on the platform, tracing the chalk marks he'd made months earlier. He whispered to his mother, "See, they came back." She nodded, though her eyes filled. Yes, but not for the same reasons. With food returned appetite, and with appetite memory. Newspapers began printing stories about the causes of the Bengal famine. Experts argued over cyclones, hoarding, administrative failure. Few mentioned the ships that had passed Calcutta untouched. One editor wrote, "In every famine, the poor die of hunger, and the rich die of shame. The difference is that one death leaves a body." The article was censored the next day. The monsoon ended as suddenly as it began. The river sank back into its banks, calm, thick, reflective. From the bridges you could see children swimming again, their laughter ringing against the stone arches where ghosts once slept. The mother watched them from the Ghat steps. She smiled, but her eyes stayed on the horizon. When the boy asked why, she said, "Because the sky remembers what it buried." By winter, new colours returned to the markets. Turmeric, chilies, bright cloth. The famine had receded into rumour. The British officers prepared to leave for new fronts. Their wives packed tea sets and rugs. Calcutta resumed its noise, trams, bells, bargaining voices.
But beneath it all, a slower rhythm persisted, the cautious pace of those who had learned not to trust abundance. People still measured grain by memory, water by hope. Even laughter had a ration. The city had survived, but survival was not the same as recovery. It was simply the art of walking forward while listening for echoes after rain. The war ended in 1945, but Calcutta did not celebrate. Fireworks went up near the Maidan, yet their echo fell hollow. To most, victory meant ration coupons that lasted longer, rice sacks that no longer arrived under guard, and fewer bodies by the roadside. The city had survived empire's hunger, but empire had left its fingerprint behind. Invisible, permanent. Some called it progress, others called it penance. The boy was 13 now, tall for his age, his face too serious for his years. He worked as an errand runner for a small printing press off Harrison Road. Each morning, he swept the floor, fetched ink, and delivered newspapers still wet with headlines. He liked the smell of print. It reminded him of rain on warm stone. When the owner caught him reading the papers instead of folding them, the man laughed. "Ah, another patriot. You want independence, eh?" The boy smiled faintly. He didn't know what independence meant yet. All he wanted was food that came on time, and nights without fire. Sometimes, when he carried bundles to the post office, he walked past the old railway arches. They were empty now, cleaned and painted. The city had built a new tram depot nearby, and no one spoke of what had happened there. But he remembered the sound, bowls clinking, children laughing between hunger pangs, the whistle of trains that carried away the lucky. He touched the brick once, quietly, as though the walls could still hear. They could. History always listens to fingerprints. His mother still worked at the depot. She had grown thin but steady, the kind of strength that doesn't announce itself. Each morning, she tied her hair, picked up the tin bowl, and left before sunrise. Neighbours said she was lucky to have steady work. She never corrected them. In the evenings, she and the boy ate together. Rice, lentils, sometimes a small onion or half a mango. When they finished, she washed the bowl carefully, polished it with her sari, and placed it upside down near the window. He once asked why she kept it clean when they owned so little. She said, because it remembers what it once held. The famine had carved new habits into the city's bones. People no longer wasted rice at weddings. Children were taught to finish every grain as if God were watching from a kitchen window. Even laughter came measured, quick, cautious, as though joy required permission. The government began printing posters. "Never again. Fight famine with production." The words looked bold against peeling walls, but to those who had lived through it, they read more like an apology. In 1946, riots broke out. Another kind of hunger, this one for belonging. Communal fires replaced the cremation pyres. The smoke looked the same. The boy watched from rooftops as the city turned against itself again, divided now not by grain, but by faith. He asked his mother, "Why does it keep happening?" She said, "Because the earth forgets faster than the sky." That same year, a journalist from London visited Calcutta to write about recovery. He met the boy by chance at the post office. The man asked, "Do you remember the famine?" The boy nodded. The journalist smiled. "Good. Tell me what it was like." The boy thought for a long time before answering. "It was quiet." The journalist frowned. "Quiet? But surely there was chaos." The boy shook his head. "No, sir. Chaos makes noise. Hunger doesn't." That line appeared in the man's article a month later. It was the only sentence the editor kept. Independence came the next year. The flags changed. The statues stayed. The famine had been folded into the footnotes of history. Inconvenient, unprofitable, too close to shame. At the Victoria Memorial,
Pigeons perched on Queen Victoria's crown as they always had. The new leaders gave speeches about sovereignty, prosperity, destiny. No one mentioned the word hunger. But in the lanes, in kitchens, in the pauses between temple bells, the silence of 1943 still echoed. By then, the boy had begun writing small stories of his own. At night, after finishing his deliveries, he would sit by the window with a stub of pencil and copy scraps from old newspapers. He wrote about rivers, trains, bowls, and rain. He wrote slowly, almost reverently, as if each word needed permission to exist. His mother watched but never interrupted. Sometimes she smiled and said, "Write it softly, so the world doesn't flinch." Years passed. The famine faded from conversation, but not from architecture. You could still see it in the wide steps of the ghats, in the cautious way people bought food, in the reverence with which they handled rice. Even the trams seemed to move slower, as though remembering what it was to stop. The boy grew into a man. He married, had children, taught them to listen when silence speaks. Every year, on the day the monsoon first touched the city, he took his family to the river. They lit a small lamp, placed it in the old tin bowl, and watched it float downstream. When his youngest asked why, he said, "Because this river once carried our ghosts. We light it, so they can find their way home." Decades later, the city no longer looked like the one that had starved. The trams were painted bright green. Billboards hung over Chowringhe Road advertising soap, cinema, and progress. Children carried school bags where their grandparents had carried begging bowls. But beneath the noise, the famine still whispered. Like a pulse you only noticed when the world grew quiet. The man, once the boy, was old now. His hair silver, his hands marked by ink and time. He lived in a small room above a printing shop, surrounded by books and dust and silence. On his desk sat one object older than all the rest. A dented tin bowl, edges rusted, still faintly shining. He kept it polished, the way his mother once had. He never used it for food. He said it was a relic, not of hunger, but of endurance. Every year on the anniversary of that first night by the river, he lit a candle and set it inside. He called it the Night of Empty Bowls. That evening, rain began again, soft, persistent, the same rhythm he remembered from his childhood. He opened the window and watched droplets race down the glass. The smell was the same, wet dust, river air, faint sweetness of decay. He could almost hear it. The voices, the thunder, the whispers of those who had once filled the city's silence. He sat by the flame and began to write, slowly, deliberately. Not as a journalist, not as a historian, but as a witness who had waited half a lifetime to speak without trembling. His words were not angry. They were tender, heavy with care. He wrote, "There are nights when Calcutta still feels like 1943. Not because people are starving, but because we forget too easily. Memory is a famine too. It devours what it cannot digest." He paused, dipped his pen, and continued. The empire left its monuments, but not its remorse. The famine was not weather, not accident, not act of God. It was arithmetic. It was decisions made in rooms far from hunger's sound. Outside thunder rolled, distant, ceremonial. He smiled faintly. History had a sense of rhythm. As the night deepened, the flame in the bowl flickered low. He leaned forward, whispering to it as if it could hear. We carried nothing from that year except silence. And yet, silence carried us. He closed his notebook and sat back, watching the light reflect against the old metal. In its glow he could see his father's hands, his mother's eyes, the shadow of a small boy tracing circles on the river's surface. He whispered one final sentence into the dark. We are not what the famine took. We are what it could not keep. At midnight, the candle burned out. The room filled with the soft breath of rain. Down on the street, trams hummed past, their bells faint and musical. The city moved as it always had, restless, alive, forgetting, remembering. The man closed his eyes. For a moment, Calcutta of 1943 returned. The hunger, the smoke, the sound of trains, the echo of a river carrying ghosts. Then it faded, gentle as dawn.
In a museum decades later, a curator opened a box of donated belongings, old letters, photographs, and a small, rusted bowl. She turned it over, saw faint etching on the underside, a single word scratched by hand. Still. She placed it on a white pedestal beside a placard that read, Artifact from the Bengal Famine, 1943. Visitors passed by, some pausing, most not. To many, it was only metal. To a few, it was a mirror. And somewhere beyond the museum walls, beyond the city, beyond the years, the river flowed on. It carried sunlight, ashes, and memory in the same current. Each ripple whispered the same thing. Remember us softly.